Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025, and after sifting through over hundreds of potential jurors, 18 jurors have been seated, 12 who will deliberate, and 6 alternates. And these 18 people will hear and see all of the evidence. The presiding judge in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Karen Reed is Beverly Cannoni of the Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham, Massachusetts. The defendant is Karen Reed, a slender white woman in her mid-40s who sits quietly at the defense table. She is represented by a team of attorneys. But today, for opening statements, we will hear from attorney Alan Jackson. Opening for the prosecution is Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan. For this episode, for the show, we will be making baseball cards that we will share on our social media accounts, because this case, and most cases in general, involve a lot of players. So, to keep everything clean, we'll share these cards as a reference. So, let's get into the opening statements. Mr. Brennan told the jury, "It's 6:04 a.m. on January 29th, 2022. In the middle of a blizzard, an alarm came into the fire station that they should respond immediately to the scene of a cardiac arrest. The location of that cardiac arrest was 34 Fairview Road in Canton, Massachusetts. As EMTs arrived on scene, firefighter Anthony recalled hearing a woman screaming. On the snowy ground lay Boston police officer John O'Keefe, unresponsive, surrounded by 3 women. One of them was Karen Reed. Initial EMTs immediately went to John's body, where they searched for signs of life. Not finding any, one EMT went over to the women and asked what happened. That's when one woman, later identified as Karen Reed, said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." Despite not quite understanding what this woman meant, the EMTs on scene returned to John's body and attempted life-saving measures. They loaded John onto a stretcher, noting unusual conditions. When they arrived, the snow was accumulating on the ground. But when they lifted John's body from the ground, he was laying on grass, not snow. And underneath him was his cell phone, untouched by a single snowflake. John was transported to the hospital, but despite efforts to save his life, it was too late. John was pronounced dead at the hospital. So now that the jury heard what happened, why are we here? It's simple, the prosecutor said, because John was killed by Karen Reed. You will learn that Karen killed John when she struck him with her SUV and left him to die in the snow. The prosecutors say that this case is about science, data, and facts, not speculation. They will introduce Waze map data, cell phone data, health data from cell phones, and black box-like information from Karen Reed's Lexus, all to show exactly what happened that night. But before we get into that, let's rewind and take you back a few hours. It's Canton, Massachusetts. There is a blizzard pending, but despite this, everyone decides to go out for drinks. The first place that Karen and John go to is a bar called McCarty's. And this bar, which does have surveillance footage, which the jury will see, well, there, Karen has a total of 8 drinks. And it's a short period of time, like less than an hour. Karen drinks 7 drinks, but while she's working on the 8th drink, they decide to go to a different bar. So Karen tucks the drink in her coat and they leave, and they head to the Waterfall Bar. They get there like around 10 p.m. There's a group of friends. Everyone is smiling, happy, hugging. There, they do some shots. That is Karen's 8th drink that night, unless you count the one that she snuck, but we don't know what happened with that. After midnight, everyone heads to Brian and Nicole Albert's home. They live at 34 Fairview Road, and they are celebrating someone's birthday. Karen gets into the driver's seat of her SUV, and John gets into the passenger seat. They drive towards that address, but they get lost. John calls Jen McCabe, a friend, and during the call, Jen says that the house is close to so-and-so's house. And so-and-so is someone that John used to talk to, or there was some sort of flirtation going on. And apparently, Karen Reed heard this, and that's when an argument ensued. After the brief call, John turns on Waze on his cell phone to look up the address. And this is important information because it shows where John travels because it continues to track his movement. Since they had made a wrong turn, the couple turns around and then there is a truck, also going to the Albert home. The truck pulls up close to the house, but Karen, she pulls to the left side of the house, kind of in the corner by a flagpole. The people in the truck stay there for a few minutes, someone runs inside and then back out, and then that truck drives off. Karen's car stays near the flagpole, and that's when Jen text messages John telling him to pull her car or to pull the car behind hers. 2 minutes later, Jen texts John, "Are you coming in?" And 2 minutes after that, John begins to move, presumably exiting the car. Then, this is where the SUV's black box comes into play. The prosecution said that the black box shows that Karen Reed places the car in drive and she drives 30-ish feet forward. Then she places the car in neutral. Then she leaves it there for a few seconds. Then she places the car in reverse and puts the pedal to the metal, giving it 75% acceleration and driving backwards 75 feet. This is when, the prosecutors argue, Karen clipped John, he fell back, bumped his head, broke his skull, and laid on the ground dying. Karen, well, she left the crime scene. The prosecution also introduces a video of one of multiple media interviews that Karen did after she was charged. And here's that clip from Dateline.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
So, who is the victim, John O'Keefe? John O'Keefe was the son of Peggy and John Sr. He has a brother and had a sister who tragically passed away. John was a longtime police officer, but he was never married and he had no biological kids. But despite this, he was actually a family man. You see, after the tragic deaths of his sister and his brother-in-law, her husband, John O'Keefe took his niece and nephew in and became their legal guardian. He was building a life as a dad, and Karen Reed was part of that life beginning around 2020 until things turned toxic. Text messages and testimony will show a relationship that was deteriorating, marked by obsession, jealousy, and conflict, all in the days leading up to John's death. According to the prosecutor, recently John had told Karen to leave, but every time he pushed her away, she smothered him even more. So, let's go back to that snowy night in front of 34 Fairview Road. The special prosecutor said that the data was proof positive that John never entered that home. You see, they point towards the temperature of John O'Keefe's phone. It was initially 77 degrees, but then when John would have first exited the car, it was at 72 degrees. Then it was at 60 degrees, and eventually it got to a whopping 50 degrees. Evidence that the prosecutor said will prove that John remained outside the entire time. The prosecutor also said that the jury will hear voicemails from Karen Reed that night after she left John to die. One particular message where she said, quote, "I hate you," end quote. The prosecutor said that when Karen Reed woke up that morning at 5 a.m., she told John's niece to call Jen McCabe, and that Karen told Jen, quote, "John is dead," end quote. There was also mention where Karen Reed initially told people that she left John at the bar, and then when she was confronted by Jen McCabe, who said she saw her SUV outside of Fairview, Reed hung up. Eventually, Karen was with others in front of Fairview, and as they approached, Karen was the only one who saw John on the ground. Immediately, she started screaming and kicking the car door to be let out. The prosecutor told the jurors that when they found John's body, he was cold, he was missing a shoe, his hat was frozen into the ground, and that shards of glass and broken taillight were found at the scene. Oh, and John's DNA? That was found on the back of Karen's SUV, along with a hair. But wait, the prosecution says that when Karen Reed went to the Good Samaritan Hospital, where John was initially being worked on, she was so hysterical, in fact, that they had to put her in a room. Eventually, Karen Reed showed back up at John's house, but when she arrived there, she was with her father. When they leave that day, they retrieve Karen's car and take it with them. Meanwhile, cops who are investigating John's death, they start hearing grumblings about Karen's broken taillight and also about things that she has said, such as, quote, I hit him, end quote. And so they start working a search warrant for Karen's car. Jurors will also hear from many experts, the prosecutor promised. The medical examiner will testify that John suffered a fatal basilar skull fracture, likely caused by falling backward. An accident reconstruction expert will also tie together black box data and cell phone data showing how Karen likely struck John. The charges that the jury will have to consider are as follows. 1. Second-degree murder. 2. Manslaughter while operating under the influence. And 3. Leaving the scene of a fatal motor vehicle collision. The state will argue that she didn't just hit him, she left him. She never called for help, she knew where he was and said absolutely nothing. And the prosecutor does say that they are not arguing that Karen intentionally killed John. They're not arguing that at all. During their opening statements, the state concluded, follow the evidence, follow the science, follow the data. Ignore the noise, ignore the speculation. The truth is in the facts. Karen Read didn't just leave that night. The prosecution says she brought the fight back, this time when she backed up her SUV, hitting John and leaving him to die in the snow. The defense opening statement was given by Alan Jackson. He told the jury, the evidence in this case will prove 3 simple but powerful truths. 1, there was no collision. 2, there was no collision. And 3, there was no collision. From the start, the prosecution has pushed a theory that contradicts science, contradicts medicine, and contradicts common sense. But the facts will show John O'Keefe did not die because he was hit by a car. There is no collision, and the Commonwealth's own evidence cannot prove otherwise. So, why are we here? Because this investigation was poisoned from the beginning by bias, incompetence, and corruption. At the center of this flawed case is now fired Massachusetts State Trooper Michael Proctor. Yep, he was fired for how poorly he handled the John O'Keefe death investigation. You'll hear that just hours after John's death, Proctor exchanged text messages with a high school buddy who was wondering if the homeowner where John was found would, quote, catch any shit. Proctor replied, quote, nope, he's a Boston cop too. That one exchange, casual yet dismissive, tells you everything about how this case was handled, according to the defense. Proctor didn't treat this like a homicide investigation. He treated it like a cover-up to protect his friends, the Alberts, a powerful family in Canton with deep ties to law enforcement and politics. And Karen Read, the defense argues, she was the outsider. She was the easy scapegoat. Proctor, the investigator, never entered the house where John was last seen alive. He never secured the scene. He never separated witnesses while interviewing them. He didn't document the full picture. He didn't want to. Instead, the story the Commonwealth is telling you was built upon a conclusion, not the evidence. So let's talk about the night of January 28th, 2022. Karen Read and John O'Keefe were in good spirits. They started their night at the C.F. McCarthy's bar and later went to the waterfall. That's where they joined a group, including Brian Albert, a Boston police officer, and the owner of the house where John would be found dead the next morning. That's right, Brian Albert is the owner of that house. Also there were Nicole and Caitlin Albert, Jennifer and Matt McCabe, Chris and Julie Albert, and Brian Higgins. This is a lot of people. So real quick, Brian Albert is a Boston cop. His wife is Nicole, his daughter is Caitlin. All 3 of them were at the waterfall. Chris Albert is Brian's brother, and Chris is a politician. Julie Albert is Chris's wife. Jennifer McCabe is Nicole Albert's sister and Brian's sister-in-law. Her husband is Matt McCabe, and Brian Higgins is a longtime friend of Brian Albert. Whew, that was a mouthful. So the group was drinking heavily, and you'll hear that Brian Higgins had recently sent some flirtatious text messages to Karen Read. But after a few exchanged chats, Karen Read had basically ghosted Higgins. And the first time that Higgins saw Karen after being ghosted was that night at the waterfall, when she walked into the bar with her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. There's actually security footage showing Brian Higgins and John O'Keefe at the bar at around 11:58 p.m., and apparently tensions were a-brewing. When the bar closed, the Alberts invited everyone back to their house at 34 Fairview Road. Karen and John drove there. They weren't sure that they were at the right house, but John got out and went inside. That's the last time Karen saw him alive. This is all according to the defense. When John didn't return back to the car, Karen became frustrated. She called, she texted, she left voicemails, messages the prosecutor will play for you. Yes, she sounds upset, but context matters. She thought John had ditched her at a party, that maybe he had started drinking and forgot all about his waiting girlfriend outside in the car. She was hurt, she was angry, but that's all, the defense argues. There was no argument that night between the couple. There was no fight in the car, and there was no accident. And yet, sometime that night, John O'Keefe suffered a catastrophic injury. You'll hear from Dr. Elizabeth LaPosada, a forensic pathologist who will testify that John's injuries were not consistent with being hit by a car. He had no bruises, no broken bones, no internal trauma, something that you might expect from being hit by a 6,000-pound SUV. This expert will tell you that the patterned abrasions on John's arm is not from a car. It's not from glass or plastic from taillights either, but it's more consistent with animal bites, likely from a large dog. Maybe a large dog like the one owned by the Alberts, who admitted their family dog was aggressive towards strangers. Oddly enough, the Alberts dog was quickly rehomed just days after John's death. You'll also hear about John's head injury, a basilar skull fracture, but not the kind that comes from falling on a flat surface like a road or from someone's flat front lawn. The injury on John's head required impact with something raised. And here's the key. John's injuries weren't consistent with prolonged exposure to cold either. He had no frostbite, no signs of hypothermia. He had to have been injured somewhere warmer and then moved to the snow afterward. That alone, the defense argues, introduces reasonable doubt. Then there's the question of visibility. Multiple people exited the Albert home early that morning after the prosecution argued that John was left for dead. Yet not one person noticed John's body lying in the snow just feet from the driveway. Mind you, John's a big guy, 6 foot 2 inches tall, roughly 200 plus pounds. Not Brian Higgins, who left sometime after 1 a.m., or the snowplow driver who passed that house at 2:30 a.m. and saw nothing. But listen, this snowplow driver, well, the lead detective didn't even interview him. In fact, Proctor wrote in his report that the roads in front of Fairview had not been plowed that morning. But the defense hunted and found the guy who actually did plow the snow that morning. He said that at 2:30 a.m., he didn't see a body. But when that same plow driver returned at 3:30 a.m., he noticed an obstruction. He noticed a Ford Edge parked in the front of the area where John's body would later be found. A Ford Edge, the exact vehicle model owned by multiple Albert family members. But what was that car doing there at 3:30 a.m.? Did Proctor investigate this? No. And that Ford Edge matters. Okay, so let's break down the timeline according to the defense's opening statement. They said that at 1:25 a.m., Brian Higgins went to the Canton Police Department. He wasn't even an officer there, although he is a cop, just not in Canton. So why was he there? Well, nobody knows. At 1:30 a.m., Higgins makes a phone call, a call that Higgins now denies making. At 2:22 a.m., Higgins and Brian Albert have a 22-second phone call. When asked, they both lied about it. They later claimed that it was a butt dial. Both men later destroyed their phones. No kidding. Who destroys their phones? And Brian Albert, the homeowner, that morning when there were over a dozen people, cops, EMS, firefighters, all outside of his house tending to John, this man and his family never came outside, not even once. Additionally, Brian Albert sold his house, his childhood home, a home that had been in the Albert home for generations. And he just sold his house months after John's death. And that aggressive Albert dog, rehomed, even though he had been with that family for 7 years. And then there's Jennifer McCabe. She was at the Albert gathering. She left the Albert home, didn't see John. She got home at around 2 a.m. Then phone records show that at 2:27 a.m., she Googled Haas long to die in cold. Yeah, there was a typo, but it's clear she meant to type how long to die in the cold. Why would Jen McCabe search for that 4 hours before Karen allegedly discovered John's body? And also, that search was later deleted. Who deletes their search history anyway? Ladies and gentlemen, how did she know? So, what happened next? Well, according to the defense, Karen woke up in a panic at 5 a.m. She called Jennifer McCabe and she left voicemails. Then she got into her car, and as she was backing out of One Meadows, which is where John lived, she hit another car. She bumped it. Now, this is key. The defense says that Karen Reed did have a broken taillight, but it was from when she hit the car that morning, which, by the way, this is actually caught on the home surveillance footage. And that footage is timestamped at 5:07 a.m. And her broken taillight was broken, not shattered. That video is crucial. It disproves the prosecution theory that taillight damage came from hitting John. And that's just the beginning, the defense promises. There were 2 searches done on the Alberts lawn after John's death, and 0 pieces of Karen's taillight was discovered during those first 2 searches. However, the defense points out that Karen's car was seized by the authorities, and that it wasn't until days after that second search, or those 2 searches, that investigators allegedly found 46 pieces of Karen's taillight scattered on Brian Albert's lawn. Coincidence? The defense argues it's not. Another strange fact? Yeah, the prosecution argued that they found John's DNA on the back of Karen's car. But there was also the DNA of 2 other unknown persons. Did she hit 2 people? Oh, and if we're talking about DNA, when they tested the taillight shards that were found at Albert's home, well, they found 0 DNA belonging to John. Now, the defense argued, that's weird, considering the argument seemed to be that those pieces that came in contact with John broke off of the car and were now scattered on the lawn. So, why wouldn't they have John's DNA? In fact, John's own shoe found on that lawn had 5 different people's DNA on it. The defense argued that the jury will hear from the prosecution's own medical examiner, Dr. Aaron Scordino, who, no kidding, refused to rule John's death a homicide based on the Commonwealth's theory of the case that he was hit by a car. That's right, you heard me correctly. Their own expert wouldn't go that far. So what are we left with? A botched investigation, a web of conflicts of interest, a case held together by missing phones, deleted search histories, and buried evidence, and a theory based on paranormal timelines of a bunch of butt dials, ghost phone calls, and evidence appearing out of thin air. The burden is on the Commonwealth, not Karen. They must prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty. And when you weigh the evidence, the real evidence, the defense argues that you'll see clearly the only just verdict is not guilty. Not guilty on all 3 counts. Okay, alternates, I am going to wrap up this episode right here, but don't go too far because day 1, part 2 will come in a different episode today, so don't you worry. I didn't want to go over our promised 30-minute episodes, but openings are so important. It paints the big picture of the trial, and now we have that big picture. We have to see if the prosecution and the defense can deliver on their promises, and they made some pretty big promises today. So take a break, stretch your legs, grab a snack, and I'll catch you on day 1, part 2. Be sure to click follow wherever you're listening and follow us on social at The Alternate Pod. That's on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Actually, on YouTube, we're just at Alternate Pod. All right, everyone, I'll catch you in part 2.